Hello people, isn't it lovely to be back doing what human beings should be doing and connecting and celebrating together. So thank you, Sam, for persevering. It took 3 years, but thanks for getting it all going. Now, as you know, we're a bit behind time. I'm covering should we be vegan. Sam asked if I could make up any time if at all possible, so the answer is no. Thank you very much for listening. And I've just saved Sam about 45 minutes, but apparently some of you do want to hear me say something or other. If you've heard me talk before, you know I don't clutter up slides with references. They're all on my website, PHC22, and you just make a note of the slide number and that will have the reference at the end. Right, what is vegan? Let's start with some of the basics. Nina will be very familiar with this bit of nonsense up in the top right-hand side of the slide. That's the My Plate. That's the diagram in the US of what they think food is. So they essentially think there are 5 food groups: dairy, grains, fruits, vegetables and protein. Now, as we know, protein is a macronutrient. It is not a food group. So I've done a blog post saying these are the food groups. I think there are 9. And if we just run through the types of people and what they will eat. So an omnivore will eat anything. Will eat anything from those 9 food groups. Yeah, they might have preferences. They might not like something, but they haven't ruled anything out. Then you've got a pescatarian who won't eat meat, but they do eat fish and the other things. Then you move down into vegetarian. And the vegetarian won't eat meat or fish, the concept being that you don't want to eat anything for which an animal has died, but you don't mind quite so much if they've been milked for cows, that kind of stuff. And then you've got the vegan down at the bottom where you're looking at those green food groups: grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, vegetables and fruits. I didn't put oils as a separate category because, of course, they come from all of those groups. So you've got seed oils, you've got vegetable oils, you've even got fruit oils. And you'll notice immediately that everything a vegan consumes, if we take those oils out of it, has a carbohydrate content. So it's quite difficult for a vegan to do the kind of thing that we're doing and putting type 2 diabetes into remission and so on. So what is vegan? Let's look at it in a bit more detail. So David Unwin picked this leaflet up at a conference that he went to and gave it to me, and I did a couple of great blog posts on it, tearing it apart. They don't want to use the term vegan anymore. They're very much going plant-based because vegan sounds sort of aggressive and militant and like you're going to be gluing yourself to the M25. And plant-based sounds all sort of fluffy and friendly and like we should all be doing it. So they're very much moving over to that kind of presentation of the whole vegan movement. And they're quite loose on the vegetarian definition as well. So this is actually a paper by Gary Fraser from 2009. And check out some of the definitions of vegetarianism. And this is actually the Loma Linda work. So most of the papers trying to claim that something great about vegetarianism, they emanate from the Seventh-day Adventist movement. So they come from the Loma Linda University over in the US. But look at their definition. So they define a pesco-vegetarian, which is actually a pescatarian, as people who eat fish but other meats up to once a month. You don't eat meat if you're a pescatarian. And then they have semi-vegetarians. It's like you're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. You're really not a semi-vegetarian. You either do it or you don't. So who are these vegans? Well, I mean, this is extraordinary data. They tend to be female. Look at that. The US data, 78% are female, and they tend to be young. So you've got 36% in that bottom age group. Add in the up to 34 age group, you've picked up 80% of US vegans. Now, the UK is slightly older, and then when you put them together, it's slightly different. I kind of see the UK as a little bit ahead of the US in terms of being vegan, but the US will catch up soon. And you have some incredibly influential vegan bloggers, and they look gorgeous. I mean, this is Morgan Mitchell. She was featured very heavily in the Game Changers movie. She was positioned as the 2-time Australia 400-metre champion. I had a bit of a digger deep, and she apparently represented Australia at the 2016 Olympics, and she came 24th. So I found myself wondering what were numbers 1 to 23 eating. Perhaps not vegan. Now, why do people go vegan? And this is when it gets personal, because like Nina, I was vegetarian stroke vegan. Most vegetarians lapse into veganism at some point for about 20 years of my life. So I am speaking on this topic from experience. There are 3 reasons why people think it's best to go vegetarian stroke vegan. Number 1, the nutritional argument. There's a belief that it's healthier. Number 2, the animal argument. Surely it's got to be better for the animals. And number 3, which is becoming much more prevalent, the planet argument. It must be better for the planet. Well, all 3 of those are going to fail, as we will now see. So we're going to start with the nutritional argument. Nina's brilliantly saved me some time on this slide because this is the pyramid of evidence. And you start sort of down at the bottom here with the animal research, anything involving Roland Rat and Mickey Mouse you can pretty much ignore. You move up the pyramid and, as Nina said, you get to the randomized controlled trials. And then at the very top, something that's come in since, I think the meta-analysis terminology is credited to somebody back as far as 1976. Up at the top of the tree, you've got these systematic reviews, which is no cherry picking, but just systematically review all the literature. And if you can then pool it all together in a technique called meta-analysis, that's even better. So that is the top of the pyramid tree. So I set about, in preparation for this presentation, looking at the systematic reviews and the meta-analyses of the RCTs on the superiority of the vegan diet. And I didn't forget to put anything else on this slide because that is the sum total of the systematic reviews and the meta-analyses on the superiority of the vegan diet. So I had to search for vegan diet and meta-analysis, and you come up with 28. All of these are shared on the reference. If you remove things that actually weren't meta-analyses, because you would not believe what some researchers put in their title, and then it actually turns out to not be about that. You remove the ones that weren't vegan, you remove the ones, well, I didn't quite remove the ones on RCTs, we'll come on to that. And then ones that were looking at markers rather than things that actually matter. And of course, one of the biggest markers that they use would be cholesterol. And who cares if your cholesterol goes up or down? What really matters is, do you have fewer heart events or anything like that? And that left 3 papers. So let's look at these. Very recent one here, 2021. This is looking at mental health and cognitive outcomes. It wasn't really focused on RCTs, but it was as good as I was going to get. It was looking at cross-sectional studies. And it found that vegan or vegetarian diets were related to a higher risk of depression, lower anxiety scores. So a bit of swings and roundabouts, not exactly a ringing endorsement of the diet. We then move on to looking at bone mineral density, which is very, very important, looking at things like complete protein here and intakes of vitamin D and calcium. And again, this wasn't entirely RCTs. It had cross-sectional studies, but I think at this point I'd have accepted evidence from the Beano or something. I was really clutching at straws. This one really didn't go so well because compared with omnivores, vegetarians and vegans had lower bone mineral density at the femoral neck and lumbar spine regions. That's pretty serious. And they also had higher fracture rates. So we come to the final one. This was RCTs. Okay, so we're going to good territory here. We're looking at a review that included RCTs, at least 6 months, so long enough as well. And they were comparing low carb, vegetarian, vegan, low GI, high fiber, Mediterranean and high protein diets for the reversal of type 2 diabetes, or for their positive impacts on type 2 diabetes, which is our home turf. So we're really excited about this study, okay? Now look at the diets that did well. Low carb, low GI, Mediterranean and high protein diets all led to greater improvements in glycemic control. Spot the ones that are missing. I think you'll find it's the vegetarian, the vegan and the high fiber. And again, this stuff doesn't get out. So I did a lot of work on the Game Changers movie when it came out. I went over to present in the US for CrossFit. They were getting a lot of questions about it. And they got together a bunch of people. Georgia Reed, Asim was over there, Gary Towles, Michael Eads. And we all did our perspective on the Game Changers movie. So I have watched this movie so many frigging times, you cannot believe it. And you would think when you're going to spend millions on a movie, you're going to put up your best evidence. So this is Dr. Dean Ornish. He's one of the high priests in the vegan world. And sure enough, he put up one of his own studies. And he said, this is the only diet that has ever reversed heart disease, and it's a plant-based one. So you look at a little bit more detail at what the study actually was. And it's a study that a number of you may be familiar with. It's his own study from 1990. It was 1 year long, it involved 28 patients, so you'll have half of them on the diet and half of them as the control group. It wasn't a vegan diet, it was a low-fat, whole food, that's quite important, vegetarian diet. But hey, guess what the other bits of the intervention were? They were asked to stop smoking, they were asked to manage their stress, and they were asked to do moderate exercise, but when you read the paper, it was up to 5 hours of aerobic exercise a week. And one marker of heart disease, which was the one that they were looking at, improved. So like, could it have been the smoking? Or could it have been the smoking? Or could it have been the smoking? Or maybe the stress, or maybe the exercise. But no, it's the low-fat diet, and the vegetarian diet, plant-based, whatever. But anyway, there was one experiment in the Game Changers movie that actually was, I hate to say it, it was really compelling. I mean, it really made you think there's something in this vegan diet. And it was called the penis experiment. Now, the penis experiment involved 3 men over 2 nights. And on night 1, they had a meat burrito, and on night 2, they had a plant burrito. And they had to put this contraption on their beef jerky overnight, and then they measured their erections, and of course they had longer erections, harder erections, better erections, you name it, the erections were it. When they had the bean burrito, that's because they were dreaming about meat, you muppet heads. And Seventh-day Adventism started the vegetarian movement because Ellen G. White believed that meat made men lustful and wicked. You can't have it both ways. But anyway, it should not boil down to cherry-picking studies because you interview Dean Ornish, or bollocks experiments, quite frankly. It should boil down to why do we eat? And we eat because there are essential nutrients. And essential in nutrition means something the body can't make. We have to consume it. So cholesterol is pretty damn important, but it's not an essential nutrient because the body can make it. But we need complete protein, and that's found in animal foods. We need essential fats, and in the form that we need them, they come in animal foods. We need vitamins and minerals, and where they come in 2 forms, the form in which we need them, guess what? It comes in animal foods. Things like retinol, the animal form of vitamin A, B12, D3, EPA and DHA, which are the form of the omega-3 fats that we need, are found exclusively in animal foods. And heme iron, how often do they demonize heme iron, make it out to be a bad thing? The most absorbable form of iron is not a bad thing, just happens to be found in red meat and seafood, the stuff that they don't want us eating. So another high priest of the vegan world, this is Dr. Michael Greger. He wrote a book called How Not to Die with a Plant-Based Diet. So I had to start my blog on this one by saying, guys, I'm really sorry to be the one that tells you, but we're all going to die. Even if we have a plant-based diet, there is no magic formula. And he laid out his perfect diet as a daily dozen. And then even more helpfully, the Daily Mail did an article on it when the book came out. And you can see the middle bit there, the Daily Mail blocks out. They love these things. So those were the daily dozens, and you're looking at 3 portions of legumes, 2 of greens, so the number in the brackets is the portions that you're supposed to have of each of those things. So down the bottom right-hand side, you've got something that isn't food or drink. It's 90 minutes of exercise, and this is your daily recommended things. So 90 minutes of exercise daily, drinks. It's a whole food diet. And we have to look at where we are aligned with vegans as well as where we disagree. So much of that on that slide we would agree with. I actually put in red, including the exercise, things like berries, greens, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, 5 drinks a day, which are only water, tea or coffee, not fizzy stuff and fruit juice. We're in harmony on all of that. The difference between the whole food plant-based diet and the whole food animal-based diet is in what's excluded, not what is included. And of course, they don't have the animal foods. So I fed all of that into a nutritional calculator that we've got on our website. And I put in standard products like apples and oranges and broccoli, nothing too fancy. And it turns out to be about 1,364 calories for the day, which is woefully deficient, even for a female. Now you could say, okay, you multiply it by 1.5 or you double it, but you can't change those macronutrient proportions. So you're looking at almost 70% of your diet in the form of carbohydrate, fat barely 16%. And then I often point out in my blog posts, protein is remarkably constant in either an animal-based diet or a plant-based diet at somewhere around sort of 15 to 20%, and sure enough it comes in at 17%. So another great example of that little factoid. But what the diet didn't deliver, because of what it excluded, was retinol, B12, D3, heme iron, DHA, EPA. We've just been through all of those. But it also didn't have enough of some quite key vitamins, B2, B3, B5, E and K2, and it was deficient in so many minerals, calcium, iron, potassium, selenium, sodium, zinc, and so on. And I joke with people, these things don't grow on trees. We have to eat them. They don't just automatically get into our body, and we're being recommended to have a diet that is that deficient. So the bottom line, as we wrap up the nutritional argument, is that a healthy diet provides the nutrients that we need. A healthy diet does not require supplementation. A vegan diet does require supplementation. De facto, a vegan diet is not healthy. And for me, that is the end of the nutritional debate. Interestingly, I never believed the nutritional argument, even before I studied nutrition and learned all of this. I thought I could be healthy enough and the animals would be better off. And I was wrong. I couldn't be healthy enough, and it's not great for the animals either. So we're moving into the animal argument now, and this is why I was vegetarian. I still don't like eating animals. When people say, oh, you just went back to eating everything because you like bacon, I don't like eating animals. But what do these animals have in common? Cows, pigs, sheep, and hens. They would not exist in a vegan world. And domestic cats would not exist in a vegan world. That's our darling Maxwell. You can see he's looking pretty indignant sat there. I think that's when I told him that a Scotch egg was a substantial meal, and he was having none of it. But he also doesn't exist in a vegan world because he's a carnivore. So at the moment, our pets are eating the byproducts of the meat industry. And I didn't get that as a vegetarian. People would say to me, oh, but what about the animals? You know, they wouldn't exist. And I could never get my head around the idea that fields would be empty. Farmers don't keep pets. You know, they would not exist. We have to have this imagery in our head. I'm going to come at it in another way. This is one of the best books I've ever read, The Vegetarian Myth by Leah Keith. She presents the arguments, she goes through them, and she starts off in the introduction, and she talks about how could I grow a lettuce for me, Leah, to eat that doesn't involve killing another animal. And she went on and she went on, and I was kind of like, oh, come on, love, moving on now. You know, we're trying to get to chapter 2. And I didn't know why she spent so much time on it, but it is the heart of understanding the fallacy of this animal argument, because there is nothing that any of us can eat for which something hasn't died. And she made that point so well in the book. For her to be able to eat the lettuce, she had to stop the slug getting to it, which either means she has to kill it, and she couldn't bring herself to do that, or she's got to stop it eating it in some way. And I had a conversation with a really good friend of mine, brilliant biochemist, Isabella Cooper, in preparation for this presentation. And she said, there's a different number of animals that have to die for us to be able to eat on an annual basis. And I thought, I'd never thought about that. So the next slide is for David. Oh, no, sorry, not that one. David doesn't like those, does he? This one is for David. David is a whole cow kind of guy. So David and Jen will get hold of a whole cow and then feed the family on it over a long period of time. And Isabella said, if you do that kind of thing, you're going to kill far fewer animals. And to a vegan, there isn't really a hierarchy. You know, a snail is as valuable as a cow, is as valuable as a sheep or a hen or a termite or whatever. So I said, do you know that you could actually feed a whole family or feed somebody on one cow? And she said, well, no, but I bet you can. So I had a look at it. And you've got the references on this slide. A typical cow, 570 pounds of beef, Only taking that into account, you're at over 600,000 calories already. So you can feed a person easily for a year. You haven't got into the vitamins and minerals, but they would probably be there in all of that meat. We haven't taken into account the fat and the bone, which we can use for bone broth, and that's without even getting into the offal, which of course is the most nutritious bit. Compare that with a chicken. 3.3 pounds of edible meat, 3,200 calories. So if you want to start looking at the hierarchy of what we should be eating, you can eat 1 cow over the year, or you can eat 228 chickens. But of course the vegan argument is I don't want to eat either. But there is nothing that they can eat for which nothing has died. This is plant agriculture. There is a brilliant paper by Fisher and Lamy where they estimated the number of deaths of animals in plant agriculture. Now look at those machines. You're ploughing across the whole field. The birds, the mice, the voles, the rabbits, God forbid the domestic cats that live next to croplands, could not escape those combine harvesters or whatever large machines. They just could not. Their estimate was 7 billion animals, nice furry little fluffy things, are being hoovered up, and that's just harvested cropland, and it's just in the US, and it's in any one year. And contrast that with 40 million cattle that are killed in the US each year for the meat that we would then eat. We do have about 9 billion chickens in the US that are killed every year. So that's the kind of thing that we need to stop, and we're going to look at that in a second. And I'm going to show you some pictures from the Game Changers, and this was the kind of powerful imagery that they wanted to use. And I agree that this is wrong. You don't have to have been a vegetarian for 20 years. Everyone in this room should say, that is wrong. That's chickens in a coop. That is wrong. This upsets me. That is wrong. That's cows being ready to be milked in those concrete jungles. This is all wrong. And they make the argument, so Tim Lang puts it very well actually, that if you put the water into the grain and then you give the grain to the cattle, then they start saying, oh look, it takes 2,400 litres of water to make one hamburger and it would only take less than that to eat the grain. Yeah, because look at what you assumed. You assumed that you were going to make the grain first and then feed that to the cows, and that's what you should not be doing. To lock animals up on concrete in sheds and take them away from the grasslands is the absolute lose-lose, because we need them out there on the grass. Because if we don't have those animals out there on the grass, their job, the job of ruminants, so that's your cows, your sheep, deer and so on, they have this incredible stomach system, 4 stomachs, where they're working in harmony with the land, and they're hoovering up all these microflora, these tiny microscopic little beings, and hosting them and then regurgitating them out. And that's how we rejuvenate topsoil. That is their role. In a vegan world where we don't have those ruminants, and this has started already, this is how we grow food. Upside down, in greenhouses, no soil necessary, and the hilarity that I find. The other thing you've got to do to those greenhouses, you've got to pump them full of CO2, because that's how you get the plants to grow. So we don't have the beauty of sequestering soil and all the rest of it. This is from Thanet Earth. They're proudly the biggest greenhouse organisation in the UK. That's what your landscape looks like in the vegan world, except there wouldn't be soil in the fields around because it's all run off down the road because you haven't had that nurturing of the soil by the ruminants. So can we agree that the animals in sheds is wrong, but it's also wrong not having them at all? Because this is what is right. This is Joel Salatin on Polyface Farm. He lectures around the world helping other farmers to understand this is not an or of you can go the sort of pesticide and high chemical route, or you can go the natural route. You can win on the production from your farmland, going the natural route, giving back to the land at the same time. And it's very much a 3-field system back to the British agricultural revolution of the 17th century. We got it right then. We've moved away from that for greed. So we would have one year the animals would be in the field, the next year the crops would be in the field, and the year after the field would be getting a rest. Because the animals are giving back to the soil and then the plants take from it. So in a vegan world, we only take from the soil and then it's gone. This is also right. That's where I live. So what's my local food? My local food is cows and sheep and the dairy that comes from them. If we panned left in that photograph, we can just about see the sea. So it's also fish, it's eggs from the chickens in the village, and it's some vegetables from the allotments around the village. It's not bean burritos from Mexico. It's not legumes from Morocco. It's not even strawberries in the winter or blueberries that come from Chile. So the question to ask on the planet argument of the vegan is, what do you eat that sustains soil? Because every time you're eating meat or dairy, you're eating something that gives back to the land. And even back in the vegetarian myth, Lear noted that the North American prairie is reduced to 2% of its original size, and the topsoil that we need to grow food used to be feet thick, and it's now barely inches. And the Soil Association in the UK is hammering exactly that message, but it's not getting out up against all of this vegan propaganda. Now, that is so by far the most important planet argument. There is almost nothing else that counts. But I just briefly wanted to touch on the methane argument because it's the main argument being used at the moment. And they say, oh, but the cows fart. Well, actually, cows don't fart, they burp. Vegans fart, and actually vegans also produce methane. If you want to look at the reference for slide 38, you'll see the paper that shows that there's methane in the farts that come from vegans. So don't blame the cows for what the vegans did. But what about these other animals? You've got termites, you've got cockroaches, you've got centipedes. Did you know that termites release 13 to 15 times the methane of cows? Why is nobody running around saying, oh my God, what about the termites? And then even more hilarious, because I never really looked into this before, I just started looking into it for this presentation, you find out that they dismiss the methane that comes from the cockroaches and the termites and the centipedes, because they've declared it to be natural. So we've got good methane and bad methane. Where have I heard that before? And then how big a size problem is it? If the cows are burping and the vegans are farting, how big is it? And when you look at things in the parts per million, so CO2, we kind of, we want to be around 400 or something, and then at 400, you've got about 388 parts that they think are natural and about 12 parts that they think are down to all the super bad things that we're doing. So when you put that up there, I mean, it's really difficult to see, isn't it, the overall impact in terms of the atmosphere. Well, I mean, methane takes it to a whole new level. So in parts per million, you start off with methane at 1.8. You can then do a bit of research and see how much of that is agriculture responsible for, and it's about 24%. It's taking it down to 0.44 of a part per million. And then enteric fermentation, don't you just love that? That's the burping and the farting. So next time something slips out, you just say, oops, enteric fermentation, you'll surely get away with it. But we're down to 0.3 in a million, which is 3 in 10 million. And I was trying to sort of get my head around this, and my husband said that's like 37 Wembley stadiums full of 90,000 people in each, and one person farts, and everyone else is supposed to be impacted by it. So I'm not really buying that. But it doesn't stop people like Prince Charles coming up with this kind of nonsense. And he wants the cows wearing something so that when they burp, I don't know, somehow it doesn't go up or whatever. And I didn't like that picture, so I said to Andy, can you fix it for me? And he said, yeah, I'll do my best. So that's the planet argument. So we're really getting close to the end. Sam, don't worry, I will definitely be making up time here. The nutritional argument. The vegans think it's healthier. The question to ask is, what supplements do you take? Because the minute you admit to taking supplements, you know that it's not more nutritious. The animal argument, it's not even what do you eat for which nothing has died. What do you think you eat for which nothing has died? Because there literally is nothing, not even a slug and lettuce. And then what do you eat that protects topsoil and rejuvenates the planet? Because for me, that's meat and dairy, but what is it for you guys? But there's a bigger thing going on. And these are the questions to ask everyone, because who is behind all of this? Who is trying to drive us to go vegan? As Nina said, with the Eat Lancet diet that came out in January 2019, you could have 0 animal produce, not even a gram, if you so choose to follow their advice. And at the same time, they were telling us to have 120 calories of sucrose. table sugar. You know that's a bad diet before you look at it anymore. So who was behind it? There was an organisation called Fresh, part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, bringing together these companies. So who exactly are these companies? Well, when you group them together, you start off with things like Cargill, and you've got agri-chemical companies or tech companies, food tech companies, basically people not in the arena of what we eat, whole, real foods that come from the land. You've then got a number of consultancy organisations that work in those fields, and then of course you've got fake food companies. And look at some of the names that we're familiar with: Kellogg's, Nestle, Pepsi's in there, Unilever, and so on. You know, they're obviously far more interested in us eating their foods rather than what we should be eating. And you're left with about 5. And they were quite curious. So you've got Bayer, a pharmaceutical company, probably don't mind if we're not too healthy. You've got Sony, which is kind of the Portuguese Walmart. You've got Google, which of course is the organisation that tells you what to think. You start Googling veganism and see what Google will tell you. Protix is really interesting. It's the world's biggest insect company. So at the same time as wanting us to go vegan, you've probably heard they want us to start eating insects. So I'm not sure how that's going to rock with the vegans. And then you've got IKEA. And I couldn't actually work out why IKEA is on this list at all, because IKEA, after all, is Lego for grown-ups. So what's going on there? So in answer to the question, should we be vegan? It's an absolute resounding no. And if you only look at the organisations that are trying to turn us vegan, I truly believe that if you can get the world to go vegan and you can take away the topsoil and you can take away our natural ability to feed the planet, feeding the planet is then in the hands of organisations like Cargill and Nestle and Kellogg's and Monsanto, and the people who would benefit enormously if we could no longer have meat and dairy and eggs from chickens and so on. So for me, this whole vegan movement at the moment is far bigger than is it okay to eat a fluffy animal. It has taken us down an Armageddon path of the planet no longer being able to grow food, and our eating, our essence of life, being in the hands of organisations for whom it's commercial and nothing to do with health. So that was the slightly longer version of no. Thank you very much for listening.